Hi, and welcome to the Research Room, a space to make research by the people for the people.
Perfect synergy.
And today I'm going to be talking more about expressive writing. So there is still quite a bit to discover here when it comes to expressive writing. There's a lot that goes on and a lot of different situations that it could work in. So I wanted to talk about specifically how it might relate to teenagers and plenty of outcomes that would be important to teenagers. So I also want to do this by applying expressive writing to a specific character, a character played by Ryder Strong. And if you can't recognize that name, that's fine. I will tell you a lot more about him and his fictional character in just a little bit. So before I do that, I want to talk about the actual study. So the study itself was another meta-analysis. This was by Travigan and colleagues in 2015. The title of it was How Effective Are Expressive Writing Interventions for Adolescents? A Meta-Analytic Review. So this is another review. It had 21 studies. And in this review, the studies were all from teens or adolescents from the ages of 10 to 18. And all these teens, they ended up either having an expressive writing intervention or they did some sort of like control condition. And then those two groups of people, their writing scores and their expressive writing outcomes and things like that were all compared to each other. And so what they found here was basically yes, expressive writing helps. It is a small effect for some things, it's a larger effect for other things. But I don't want to like spend too much time on this actually, because I think that there's a lot of details here, and those details are also written in other places. I really want to like help make this like a more relatable thing first. Or at least in this podcast. So if you do want more details on like what it affects, what it doesn't affect, please do check out the other content that I've made on the website. But for now, I'm going to go back to Writer Strong. And so here, from the years 1993 to 2000, there was this show that was very popular, and I think still like some people follow it still. But the title of it is or was Boy Meets World. And so Ryder Strong was one of the main characters. He goes by the name Shawn Hunter. And Shawn Hunter, if you know the show, he was, I mean, quite the character, right? He was the nice like foil to Corey. He was like the bad boy. He um, or like the cool kid, right? Like he wanted that respect from people because other things in his life were lacking, right? So he did all the things that a bad boy would, or the like stereotypical person in those kind of shoes would do. So he would tell off teachers, he would womanize, he would be a bully, all these things. But of course, like any kid that is going through this, or like most any kid, like everyone has slightly different stories, right? But in this case, his cool exterior was, of course, like a facade for like the kind of broken child that he was on the inside. His parents didn't care about him. I mean, it seemed like nobody really cared about him. He couldn't have like any like long-lasting relationships with people. Until really Corey came along, and that was his best friend. He dated around a lot, and I mean, all leading to nothing. I guess you could say like he's also friends with like Topanga, and but like not nearly as close as like with Corey, right? And probably the only other person that like he really had like a real relationship with Angela, which like that was way later on. So anyway, you get the point that like he was kind of just like this like loner that like wanted attention, that wanted those social connections, but couldn't get it and didn't know how to do it, like didn't know how to like properly like and appropriately do this. So I do think that expressive writing would help in this case. And I'm like, yes, he's a stereotype. He's not necessarily any actual kid out there, but maybe there are things that could be applied to other adolescents in the world. So um, I'm going to just focus on three different things here, three different outcomes of interest when it comes to Shawn Hunter. So the first one is talking about problem behaviors. And so in this case, that is this idea of externalizing. And externalizing is just when you are inappropriately dealing with like your emotions through other acts of aggression. And that could be like, it could be vocal aggression, it could be physical aggression, it could be just anything else that like is used to like soothe yourself, but like and make yourself feel better, but it's very inappropriate, right? Like you can't just be treating people like that. You can't just be like having these like fits that are potentially dangerous, right? So this is one potential thing that we could use expressive writing for in this case. And so Shawn Hunter, very much a bully, at least like he started out that way. He changes throughout the course of the show, but yeah, I mean, he would definitely like want to like steal like people's money and like things like that. So, or even bullying in the sense of like he didn't want to like talk to the teachers. He felt like everyone would like misunderstand him. So like he put up that very aggressive like response and reaction to people. And so when it comes to this, expressive writing, I think would help in like two different ways. And so I guess I'll also say that like these are sort of my opinions. Like it's all based on research, but like the actual research, this review doesn't like look at these like potential ways for why these things work. But I think like it makes sense. And maybe once you hear me out, it'll also make sense to you. So for bullying, when you think about a bully, like why are they bullying? Why are they like externalizing in this kind of way? So you might want to think about like, oh, like maybe they don't have like a real sense of identity. So like they just kind of gravitated to something that like gave them attention and like they feel like they are useful for something. They feel like they are being heard at least, like even if it's like fake, right? Like they have to be like dealt with by other people, or like they have to like have a sense of like respect because like people like don't look up to them. They mostly just like fear them, but like it like on the surface, it sort of like looks the same, right? So these kinds of bullies, they might feel like empowered because of that. They might feel like a more of a whole person. Um, but in reality, right, like they're still like grappling with like their fragmented like sense of self. They don't really have those other like potentially like good role models to know like how to interact with other people, like how do you actually like gain respect from people, how do you gain trust from people, how do you make sure that like you are getting the things that you want from conversations but like in a more appropriate like fashion, right? So what expressive writing might do is it would like literally you have to write about like problems in your life and like about yourself, how you're handling things, like how you think other people are handling it, like things like that. And so through all of these kinds of things, I think that would help like give a sense of like who you are. It'll give a sense of like, oh, like I understand, like I'm angry at like all these other things. Like I don't have to be angry at like this other person. I don't have to take out that anger on these other people. Actually, my anger should be like directed toward like why I'm in this position in the first place. And maybe that just helps you like to work through those problems. The other thing would be because I think like bullying is sort of this coping mechanism in it of itself that if you can replace these like negative behaviors with something that's a little bit more positive or at least neutral in this case, if someone feels like there is a lot of like pent up stress or anxiety or something in them and they need to take it out by like lashing out on others, then instead of doing that, you might just like turn to writing. And if you feel the same effects as you did, if you feel just as like soothed by it, then yeah, of course that would help. And you might start to like gravitate to like those other means of coping rather than the bullying way of coping. So I think that might be the case here with Shawn. Maybe if he learned how to just like sit with his feelings and like write a little bit, that would at least curb some of these like bullying tendencies. I don't think it would outright like fix it, of course, but it would help. to some degree. But I do think like maybe from these other things, maybe like the whole picture might help him to become like less of this bully kind of character. So a second outcome here is this idea of social adjustment. So social adjustment is just like it's if you are feeling as if you can relate to other people, if you feel like you're not like ostracized in society by your peers and like those that are around you, right? If you feel like you're understood by others, again, the like sense of like trust and like things like that, right? So through expressive writing, the study also showed that the more that you expressively write, the more socially adjusted that you are, the more that you feel like you have a place in this like social world, and that's a huge thing in this case, right? Shawn very much felt like he was just kind of alone, and like he didn't really have friends, and like of course that makes sense. He was bullying people, like why would he have friends? But like there's the other reasons for why he just like felt like he was always like neglected, and that's of course because of his parents. His parents just weren't there to like give him that support and like let him actually know that like, hey, like you are a human and like you are allowed to like have these feelings, but like also there's other parts of you that can be accepted just as well. So without like that kind of like connection and like reinforcement, he didn't necessarily feel socially adjusted with these other people. So expressive writing would help again in this case, because one of the like main reasons for why expressive writing can help, and this is from other research, is that it helps you remember that like, hey, like there are actual people in your life that like care about you. It might not be many, but at least there's some people. And so like in this case, Corey, of course, Corey was always there. I mean, even some of his other like bully friends, like, I mean, I think they kind of like, they had some sort of like connection with each other. And then there's like Mr. Turner, another teacher that like ended up kind of being his parental like role model, and I mean he literally lived with him as a parent. So these kinds of people, like even if it's not that many, right, even if you can just like count them on your hand, like that is still going to be enough to like reinforce this idea that like, okay, there are people, there must be like good qualities in me, and like that kind of like reinforcement again is like it's a nice thing to like have that sense of like, okay, I can be cared for, I'm allowed to be loved, I'm allowed to be cared about, like things like that, right? And that might help you just like also deal with people in a better way, and that might like also positively like spiral upward, but potentially not, right? But at least in this case it would be enough for him to have a sense of like belonging. The last thing here, actually, wait, I'm just kind of thinking like, what else happened in the show? One good example of like a lack of social adjustment as well. So I've been talking about like the bullying thing quite a bit, but like there's these other ways that it manifested in the show as well. So there was also this time, and I don't remember all the details, but I just remember that he bought a pig, right? Or I don't know if he bought it, maybe he stole it. Who knows? But he had a pig at some point, and that pig was like to represent that like he was feeling neglected again, right? Like he was feeling like, oh, like I can't actually turn to anyone, no one actually cares for him. In this case it was mostly because like Corey was like with Topanga, and like Mr. Turner was off doing his own thing, or like he felt like he was like overburdening Mr. Turner, so he got this pig. He had this like social support from the pig, but like that's not like, you don't, yeah, there's other ways to go about this, right? And like I'm not saying don't get a pig, but like there are other people out there, and obviously Corey still cared about him, Mr. Turner still cared about him. It was all mostly like his perception of things. So through expressively writing, I think he would help remind himself that, hey, these other people are actually here for him. Okay, so enough on that point. Last point is, and this last point I think is going to be fairly quick, because I mostly just want to bring up another idea here, that expressive writing won't always necessarily help. But in the case of like the stereotypical bully sort of thing, they also tend to not go to class, right? So this idea of just participating in school, if there is somebody who is skipping class, there's reasons why, of course, they are skipping class. It's not just because they hate learning or something like that, although potentially, right? And like there's other things that go into that, but like if they're not feeling accepted again, if they're not feeling like their peers accept them, if they're not feeling like the teachers like understand them, and like all the time you're just like being berated by teachers and like authority and things like that, like of course you're gonna skip class. Like that's not, why would you do that? Why would you go? That's not a fun situation to be in. It's not a positive like learning kind of experience. So in this case, expressive writing again might help with this participation sort of aspect, and probably because of like these other things, because his externalizing behaviors will be a little bit better, because he'll feel more socially adjusted. He might just feel like, okay, I can come to class. I still might not like it. It might still be boring, but at least I'm not like being berated all the time. And I know that there are people that I can count on that are in these classes. But I do want to say that this might help in the case of like Shawn, because he had all this like negativity going into, I mean, let's say if he actually did the intervention, like he would have this negativity to like work through. But for students that don't, and for adolescents that don't necessarily have this negativity, if they are like sort of at this more neutral place, or if they are like even positive, like have a good sense of well-being, then expressive writing might actually get in the way. And so someone that expressively writes when they are in this like good state, it might actually like bring them down a little bit. And that's not helpful, because they were already like adaptively coping in whatever way it was, right? There's plenty of ways to do that, but it brings them down in that case, and they might actually suffer for those reasons. So like maybe if we could take like other characters from the show, right? So like Topanga, like if she were to exclusively write, it potentially wouldn't help, and it might even make things worse. Same thing with like Minkus, a very scholarly young lad. He, I mean, for whatever reason, like he still enjoyed school, right? Like even though he was constantly bullied and like made fun of, he enjoyed it enough, and so maybe exclusively writing like would actually get in the way of that, because you're focusing on the negative for a little bit. So yeah, I mean, these are just things to keep in mind, that like it's not going to necessarily work for everyone. Maybe on this point though, I will say that like regardless of the age of the adolescent, so it doesn't matter if they are 10, if they're 18, if they're 15, or something else in between, expressive writing ends up helping pretty much just the same across these age groups. And then the other thing is regardless of gender. I mean, these studies only account for male, female, but there doesn't seem to be any kind of difference, at least not a reliable enough difference between at least these two genders. So good things to keep in mind, I think, that this is probably something that like is approachable for most people, but we do need to keep in mind like other parts of the background, like again, this emotional like stability is like sort of thing. Maybe the last little wrinkle here is that expressive writing might only be as effective as like someone wants it to be, right? So if you're somebody, and especially like as a teen, right? Like if you just don't value like talking about your emotions, if you don't value talking about your thoughts and like actually like thinking through them and like things like that, like it potentially will not help to do expressive writing. Like through expressive writing, you might change the way that you value it. But if you're someone who just like outright just doesn't value it, then like it probably won't work. And this is also something to keep in mind. Like we don't just want to like force everyone to do this, right? There are definitely ways that either it'll backfire or just like be a waste of time. And there's other things that we could have been doing in the meantime instead of trying to make them right. So that's just something else to keep in mind. But that's all I wanted to say. This is, I think, how it might apply to Shawn Hunter in this case from Boy Meets World. And yeah, I guess that's kind of it. For next week, we're going to continue with expressive writing. It's going to be the last week of expressive writing, at least for now. And I want to move on to something that is very present day stressful, which is COVID-19. And so I want to apply this to the situation, but I want to like add another layer to this from research, which is the idea that like it's not all about just like getting rid of the negative, right? Like it's not just about decreasing that. There are other positives that can come out from expressive writing, and that's kind of this idea of post-traumatic growth. And so, yeah, I mean, in what ways can expressive writing actually help not only like get us back to like our baseline, but like actually make us even more positive? So that's what's coming up next week. In the meantime, check out everything on roomforresearch.com or at Room for Research, and I will see you then. Until then, bye for now.
With the summer breeze, perfect sense.